The guide looked at us, and he said he wasn't religious at all. And he looked at us, he said, "Can you read verses 13 and 14 again?" So we read, "Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set in the hill cannot be hid. Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted?" We read those, and he stopped us, and he said, "I just want you to know that as a citizen of Israel, America has done this thing that Jesus said. You've done this thing. You've been a light to the world." He said, "I want to thank you for that. We see it." He said, "But I just want to ask you, please don't stop." He said, "Because if you stop, I don't know who's going to step forward and do what you're doing."
Anna Grace Smith. We're having a wonderful NRB Conference 2024.
We are having so much fun. We have our crazy socks today.
Yes.
Which my mother just judged me for on Instagram.
She judged you.
She asked what's with the socks.
We went
You have to break the ice somehow.
And
we
had
did.
fun.
Yeah, you have to break the ice in these environments somehow, where it's like you have to be so serious and so on.
Really,
for so many hours.
so our guest is rocking some really sharp
amazing leather boots.
I love it. Your boots were made for walking.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's just what
right.
they
They
And
were.
we are so excited here to have the spiritual price of political silence,
yeah.
author. My voice is all over the place. I'm so sorry. But will you please say your name, because you're three named like we are.
Right,
so.
yeah. So I'm Christy Stutzman. That's a
good.
mouthful. Usually go by Christy Stutzman, but a lot of my friends from my growing up years know me as Christy Chaver, so I thought I'm going to use all three of those names. So
Well, we have our.
Yeah, you
we
sound
use our
like
three names.
you're a woman of many palettes.
Yeah.
Momming, politics,
Right.
the list goes on.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Like, what you seem very driven.
Yeah, so I grew up in a family of 4 girls, and we were given the freedom to follow whatever God had on our hearts, whatever God led us to do.
Wow.
And there was nothing out of range. There was nothing that limited us just because we were women. I appreciated that about my parents and the way they raised us, to be bold, to be courageous, to go after what God calls you to do. And it kind of put me in a world of men in a way, because I'm a music composer. And there's a lot of, it's kind of male dominated sometimes, and it's really fun to be able to kind of navigate that type of world and kind of speak your creative, juices into, that time. And it's just really, it's kind of a passion of mine, but I'm also getting into the 4th musical that I'm writing right now, stage musical, and we have a theater and a restaurant in northern Indiana, and that's where I kind of workshop my new musicals and premiere them, and then we make them available for license around the country. And one of the things that God told me to do when we started the production company was to produce content that was uplifting, wholesome, but on an excellent scale that was compete with the best of the best. And so that's what we're working on right now. But in the meantime...
So is this original content?
I'm sorry?
You're making original content?
Yes. Yeah, so we're basing it on... The 2 of the musicals are based on Jeanette Oak's best-selling book. So one is When Calls the Heart, and the other one is Love Comes Softly, that comes out this summer.
Right.
But in the meantime, I also am very passionate about Christians being involved in politics, especially in America. And so I helped my husband with several campaigns. He ran for office. He was a state rep, state senator, and a U.S. congressman. And I was intricately involved in those campaigns, fundraising, PR, advertising, whatever. I was involved with that. And I wanted my kids involved with that too, because as Americans, I feel it's our birthright. And then I ran for state rep as well and served in the state house for 2 years. And I love doing all of the above. So yeah, that's
Why
kind of
politics? As a woman, what captivated you to plunge into that realm?
Well, it was really concern for our country. Concern for my kids. What kind of future were they going to have? And I was starting to see all this craziness bubble up and go, like, where did this come from? And now wait a minute. I think watching some of the people that were in elected office, you're thinking, well, I could probably do a little better job than that, especially if you've had a little business experience, you understand how to make payroll, and then you're seeing these policies come down that just don't make sense for the average person.
They don't make sense in our country. I mean, we're on the edge. And when you hear and listen to Mark Levin, he's still hanging in there, but I mean, everybody's it is pivotal. This is a pivotal year.
This is a pivotal moment. It
Well,
is.
you're
And so, I mean, your book is perfect. The political silence thing, I'm just going to cut straight to the chase.
Okay.
It must be very difficult, and had been very difficult, to be a woman in the political arena.
Right.
Because, you know, I mean, there are so many great, you were endorsed by Rand Paul. There's so many great politicians out there who are more than just politicians.
Right.
But there is a stigma attached to a woman speaking out and standing up.
Right.
And especially with your values,
Yes.
Christian values.
But I mean, we saw the original, you know, we saw what Sarah Palin went through. I mean, just because she happened to look a certain way
Yeah.
and was very strong.
Right.
And I, you know, that was probably one of the most first obvious ones I looked at and went, okay, no one's, you know, making fun of Margaret Thatcher. What, you know,
Yeah.
what is the
There
difference?
are a few. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yep.
I mean, how did that go for you?
Well, yeah, when you first kind of step your toe into the water of politics, you have to be prepared for pushback. It'll always happen.
Right.
And when you look at the history of America and our political system, it's never been pretty.
No.
You know, I mean, it's never been
No.
pretty. I think the thing that really motivated me as a woman, though, was realizing that my great-grandmother was the first woman in my family tree to actually be able to vote. So it wasn't that far removed from me, and I felt more of a responsibility to be involved because before her, none of the women had a chance.
Right.
And so I feel like there's just more responsibility there okay, they fought hard, you know, for the right to vote and to be involved. Now, that's not to say that women weren't involved in certain ways. I mean, I remember going to the Susan B. Anthony office there near Capitol Hill, and she had like these cards. It was like 3x5 cards back in the day, and they had these files, and they had files on not just members of Congress but also their spouses, and they would wait on them for tea. They would have tea with them. They would talk to them. They would find out what their likes and dislikes were. This woman loves to go to the dog races. This woman loves to have tea. This woman loves chocolate. You know, I mean, they knew about all these little details. Why? Because the spouses were influential on the members
Right.
of Congress, and they were trying to convince men to give women the vote. And so who better to speak into that than the wives of the men who were serving?
Right.
And she had learned a lesson in New York State when they kind of won a battle there and got the right to vote, and then a year later it was rescinded by the same men that gave it. It was really a fascinating study to me on persistence, on courage, and then also on how to navigate our political system. So when I first got involved, I was definitely expecting pushback, and I've gotten it, you know, and I just thought, well, I mean, if Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had these big public spats, you know, and go back and forth, and Abraham Lincoln and his opponents, you know, hey, bring it on, I can do it too. And I had seen my husband take a lot of hitting, like, you know, hits, criticism, whatever. And what's amazing as a Christian is that you always have God and you always have your faith.
That's true.
And somebody gave me great advice when we first got involved. They said, just remember to put your reputation in God's hands and leave it there. And then you just do what he called you to do.
Right.
Then it's up to him. Because Christ made himself of no reputation. You know,
Right.
took upon him the form of a servant, was made in the likeness of man. If he's willing to do that, then we should be too. But in America, it's just, what an opportunity, you know, to be a part of it, part of the conversation. And I've seen committee meetings, I've seen decisions being made. I remember watching this one committee meeting at the State House, and it was all men and one woman in this committee. And they were discussing this ad nauseum, you know, this decision. And finally, the woman spoke up and said something. It was something that nobody else had thought of.
Yes.
And it was because she was coming from a different perspective.
Right.
And I thought, that's why we need to be there.
That's
You know, we need to have a full spectrum conversation.
So I'm curious because obviously to be in your shoes and within the political realm that you have been in, you have to have a really strong mentality. And there's this idea among culture of being the strong woman,
Right.
the confident woman. And obviously you have to have that. You can't be, I'm sure, among a very like male dominant world.
Oh, very.
You can become a doormat very easily. But there also is the other end of the spectrum where we now have what we call radical feminism.
Right.
And how would you differentiate that? Do you think that that's been a downfall in even how women present themselves in politics?
I think, after studying, doing a deep dive into cultural Marxism, humanism for this book, The Spiritual Price of Political Silence, I really feel like we have really gone down a path that the cultural Marxist humanists want us to go down to.
Yeah, absolutely.
They want us to be... So they believe in transhumanism, right? So they don't like the limitations of a woman's body or a man's body. They want to be above that, right?
Yes.
It's really insanity. And as I read these big...
And it's not true. It's not logical. It's not scientific.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But they've swallowed this lie.
Yeah.
And as I read these thick books, I realized that you could boil it down to one verse, and that is, the fool hath said in his heart, there is no God.
Yes.
So when you look at radical feminism, that is a rejection of God.
Yeah.
So you're rejecting who God made you to be, the beauty of being a woman. There's so many wonderful things about being feminine and being a woman that doesn't make you weak.
Right.
It's actually a strength. And just because the Bible calls us the actual interpretation is a more precious vessel. Mm-hmm. Well, what do you do with a more precious vessel? It's in a place of honor. Mm-hmm. And when you see cultures around the world that actually embrace the biblical worldview, women are honored and respected. They're also allowed to be strong. And that's the beauty of it. But when you try to be like a man and you're not okay with being a woman because you're so obsessed with being like men, you're defeating your power and your purpose. Yeah.
And you're not living out reality the way God created you. You're fighting against the Creator.
Right.
There was a very good book, and I don't know if you've ever read it, and I cannot ever remember the name of the author, but it's called Subverted.
It's called what?
Subverted.
Okay.
Subverted. And it was all about the start of feminism in the 70s. Late 60s, early 70s. And she was just talking about it, it was really created like at Cosmopolitan magazine. There are all these writers and all this. But there was a general force for good in feminism that stood up for the rights of women, very much like, was it your great-grandmother or your grandmother?
Was it who?
Your great-grandmother or your grandmother
it
for
was
the
my great-grandmother, yes. Uh-huh.
Who was standing up for that, standing up in that way.
Right.
For the natural, rights of a person in America, and how it was perverted. And that this is what this book talks about. And there was this division of feminism where it had its roots in a natural good thing.
Yes.
And then it totally was subverted.
Yes. When you look at Katie Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, all the leaders of that movement, they were all pro-life.
Yes.
They were all anti-slavery.
Yes.
They were all, they were just bold on those issues, and they wrote about it.
Yeah.
But it's been hidden. It's been we don't talk about it anymore.
No.
Nobody talks about it. Nobody wants to talk about it. And what I was really shocked, I think the most at when I was doing research for the book, was that America was targeted over 100 years ago by these cultural Marxists who were intellectual elites.
100 years. It blows my mind.
100 years ago.
Yeah.
It's been a long time.
Yes.
And they've had this long game that they've been playing with our kids.
Yeah.
And they targeted the universities first, and now it's down all the way to the kindergarten. And I think in the sexual revolution of the 60s and 70s, they were just playing out what was being taught.
Absolutely.
And then what they realized was, whoa, wait a minute. And you're seeing some videos on TikTok, other places where women are starting to regret believing this.
Yes.
Because it doesn't fulfill.
No.
It doesn't give joy.
No.
There is not that natural fulfillment that
No.
God wants you to have.
No.
And but it's just taken us a long time to wake up to it and realize as it's played out in our lives, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't delivering what I thought it would. Some of the stories of the original radical feminists, their life stories are terrible. Just watching their life play out, it's terrible.
Well, she came. She turned, and I will put it on the show notes, her real name, but along with your sources. But she totally became a Christian because she realized the emptiness of it all at the end of the day.
Yep.
Do you feel that you get negative feedback from other women because of your biblical values as a woman? Do you feel like, because I feel like the narrative in American culture is that if you're a woman, you automatically get a bit more of a hierarchy, sometimes
Yeah.
men to speak your opinions and things within the realm of feminism. Yet if you have Christian values, suddenly you're silenced. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, you're a second-class citizen if you're a Christian.
Right.
I think what you're seeing there is a playing out of something that I was made aware of it was a diplomatic delegation mission that we were on, my husband and I, visiting some Eastern Bloc countries. And I realized, and I talk about this in the book, I realized as I talked to these people who had lived under communism that there were bits and pieces of it in our culture affecting women, affecting young people, affecting everybody, and we don't even realize it. And that was, I asked him, what was it like under communism for you as could you choose your own church? Did you have freedom of religion? What was it like? And he said, of course. He kind of laughed, and he said, well, of course we have freedom of religion. I said, you mean you could go to any church you wanted? He goes, well, yeah. I mean, as long as you didn't want to go to college. And I said, so wait a minute. Okay, so you're telling me that if you went to church, you weren't allowed to go to college? I said, how did they know? And he goes, oh, they kept records. And I said, but why weren't you allowed to go to college? Well, because you were a person of faith, so you weren't scientific, according to the government. Well, the same thing here. So if you're seen as a Christian, as a person of faith, then you're not supposed to speak out. You're not supposed to be bold. You're not supposed to be strong. And it really is, it's amazing how they put you in a box.
Yeah.
And they say, well, then you're relegated to this.
When it's so sad because historically you look at Galileo, and I mean Christians, there was so many Christian scientists that have brought us the things that we
the greatest advancement in human history.
We're sitting under lights and things like that because of Christians and electricity and voltage and what all.
Yeah.
But it is amazing to me the division that we have.
I can't remember the last time I saw a Christian scientist, like a scientist who believes in creation, being the expert on the National Geographic Channel.
No.
That's never happened in my lifetime, And I'm like, okay, why not? Well, I think we're seeing little, bits and pieces of what it was like in communism coming to our shores and allowing us to be intimidated. And it's just made me bolder. It's just made me more willing to stand up and speak truth. And God says if we speak truth, He's going to show up. And He's
so
gonna
in
be
your
with us.
book, how do you set about? And I haven't got to read it yet. So because there's so many good books from In-Game Press, yay! But this one is a necessity for this voting year. I mean, this is a get-to book now.
Yeah.
So what would you say our guide is, or just give us just a little rundown of
the
what,
book?
Yeah. Well, and what you would suggest for us to do in this upcoming year.
Right.
Because it is crucial. I mean...
Oh, it's all hands on deck right now. So I think, my goal with the book was to make it really practical, very readable, easy to read. It's got short chapters. It's not very long. Give a lot of resources. So if you want to do your own research, you can. But I divided it up into 3 different sections. So the first section is kind of like a refresher course on our Judeo-Christian founding. So I went to original documents and just talked about, the actual words of the people. And I also made sure to make it clear they were not perfect. They were flawed people.
Right.
They were sinners. They had problems just like the rest of us, whether it was their marriage or whether they were owning slaves. I mean, you name it, they had problems. Yeah. But one thing they got right was the fact that they allowed us, they left us a setup, I guess it's a way of operating our government where we can actually fix societal wrongs because they knew we were human and they knew societal wrongs would happen and continue to happen. So they gave us a means and a tools to do that. And so we have, if you look at our history, we have corrected the wrongs. Women can vote. There's no more slavery. There's so many things that we've addressed and because we have those tools to do it. And they also made 2 assumptions, and that was that people of faith would always be involved. Why? Because people of faith, out of their own preservation of their own freedoms, would want to be involved, and also because they would want to pass it on to their children. So they were assuming, and also they knew that any type of government they set up, if it wasn't led by people of a moral caliber, it wasn't going to work. No matter what kind of government they set up, you had to have people of moral character and people of faith at the table leading it. So they made that assumption. So that's the refresher course, because we all need that. I mean, I'm Gen X, and so a lot of us didn't get that. In school they had taken all that out, a lot of our history books. So then the middle part is, well, how did we get to this cultural Marxism and this humanism that permeates our culture right now? How did we get here? Talk about the targeting, talking about how it's playing out, and how that the church had a divide at the turn of the century, and half the church decided to be active and almost give away their responsibilities to the government.
Yes.
And the other half of the church withdrew completely. And so we need a happy medium in the middle. And so I talk about that, and then at the end, it's just practical, like, how do I get involved, right? So where do I start? It's so overwhelming. Well, do you make crafts? You could actually donate your crafts as a door prize, at a fundraising dinner for a candidate that you like. You could hold a coffee in your house, and just I go from there all the way to how to vet candidates. How do you vet them? How do you get to know them? I know a lady in our area, she refuses to vote for anybody on her ballot that she has not seen in person. Doesn't necessarily have to talk to them, but she wants to meet them in person and assess them in person.
Okay, I have a story here.
Yeah.
And I've told this before, but it was the eve of an election for a candidate in North Carolina, and I walked up to him and I said, "Sir, if you're elected, are you going to lose your moral compass? Are you going to step down from all the things that you said that you were going to stand for?" And he looked like a golden child. I mean, just everything down the line.
Yeah.
And he says, "I promise to you I will not." And then we all prayed as a group. I was in an election office, and we were praying as a group for him with a man who was running. 6 weeks. It took 6 weeks.
Wow. And
so this is an essential toolkit that we need for this year. But how do we stand? I mean, the Bible is full of standing against evil. It is darkness. It is dominions and powers and rulers that we are fighting against.
It's a spiritual battle.
It's a wrestling. It is definitely prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think really honestly to move these black. We definitely need prayer. That's the starting point of everything. The other thing too that I share in the book is that if you go to a coffee or a town hall or something, and you get to talk to a candidate, and you offer to help them with their campaign, walk in a parade, make a phone call, whatever, they will have your number in their phone. Now, even if they're running for school board or town council or something, when they go to run for the next elected office, they will know you personally. And when you call them on their cell phone and your number comes up, they will know, oh, it's so-and-so, hi. And you say, yeah, buddy, been watching what you're voting for, don't like it. Yeah. And here's why. All of a sudden, their attention, you get their attention, and you have an accountability measure set up, just naturally set up. And it's because you just took the time to get involved at the ground level, and know them before they ran for the next No, I like having
level.
the personal number, because when you call the congressional number, you cannot get through the boards.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, when they say
tough.
call your candidate, the best you can do is an email.
Right.
And then you get a polite response,
or an automatic response or whatever.
Right.
And, but if you know that candidate personally, and they know that you have worked with them from the beginning, that gives you the ability to actually speak loudly for so many others that can't do that. Because you have a personal relationship with them. So
So I'm curious, because in our culture there's a huge desire, I would say especially among women, for candidates who were, quote, pro-woman, but I think that looks very differently. There are some issues people would dub pro-woman that people of our values would not.
Right.
Which of those issues, like politically speaking, would you say there are any that to the secular crowd look like they're anti-woman but actually are very much for women? And could you speak into that?
Oh, I think pro-life, the pro-life stance is pro-woman.
Yes, absolutely.
It's something that has been so twisted in our minds for so long, and the way it's been presented, that I've heard so many people that are starting to speak out about how it has limited them. And the other thing too about our generation, Gen X especially, my generation, half of us aren't here because of abortion. And it makes me even bolder to speak out because I'm speaking out on behalf of half of a generation that's not here.
That's missing.
We were lied to.
Yeah.
You know, we were lied to by leadership, by scientists, by all the humanists, you know, that this was okay. So that is definitely a pro-woman thing, even though the other side will say it's not.
Right.
Because what they're saying is you're empowered by doing something that will affect you negatively the rest of your life, even though they're not telling you.
Yeah.
And
wiping out a woman.
Exactly, in the process. Another woman in the
Yes.
process, you know.
Just for the sake of convenience.
Right, for convenience most of
Yes,
the time.
yeah.
In fact, the stats say, you know, they always bring up the exceptions. The exceptions are minuscule
Yes.
compared to the
Yes.
vast majority that is out of
Yes.
convenience. And so that's something that we've got to change our mindset on. We've got to liberate ourselves from that mindset of, you know, that's anti-woman. There's other things, too, that I find are, you know, I don't know if I would categorize it as pro-woman as much as it is pro-freedom, you know. I think there's a lot of issues that they try to relegate into certain boxes, and really it has to do with freedom across the board. And how do you view freedom? Do you view it as, I call it an anarchy of the mind. So this new generation almost has this mentality that don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do my own thing. I'm going to be my own truth. And it ends up being an anarchy of the mind.
Right.
Yep.
But that's not freedom. It actually, you know, holds you down.
You think boundaries actually lead to freedom.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Structure, boundaries instead
Yes.
of that's liberation.
Right, exactly.
Right.
And I think they've swallowed this lie that, you know, there's no boundaries. We shouldn't have, you know, law enforcement. We shouldn't have authority. It really is, again, to that verse, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. That includes no authority.
Right.
That includes no family structure. That includes no government. That includes no law enforcement. Anything that smacks of authority is out the window.
Which goes back to Marxism.
Well, and I
Yes.
think
I
a lot of
yes.
women in this culture look at people and figures like these celebrities or political figures like AOC, and they think, oh, it's like all these open boundaries. And I think women, especially in the radical realm, they think that being, quote, pro-woman is doing whatever you want, whenever you want,
Yes.
zero consequences,
Zero
instant
consequences,
gratification.
And make sure you post everything on Instagram so we can see your journey.
Of course.
Yeah.
But I think I personally think as a woman, that's a huge lie that factors into even who we vote for politically, and that we've mistaken what actual feminism is. And I love that you brought up Susan B. Anthony earlier, because a lot of people will look at my life or, you know, my kooky aesthetic choices and kind of assume I'm on one end of the spectrum. And they're very shocked when I have more conservative values, but I'm a huge advocate that boundaries and liberation coincide.
They go hand in hand.
They do.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, because God set up a natural order. You know, there's a natural law. The founders talk about the natural law. So when you look at nature and how things operate, there is a natural order to things.
Yes.
So if you follow that natural order, you're going to blossom. You're going to thrive.
Right.
You know, you're going to bloom.
Even if you're not a believer.
I was going to say the
Yeah.
secular
Exactly.
culture and sexual freedom. What are your thoughts on that? Because that's huge, especially if they don't have our same shared moral compass, which is where I see such a crux.
Yeah, I think they can never avoid the consequences.
Right.
They can try as they might, but even if you're, you know, you're taking birth control or you know, have an abortion or whatever, there's a psychological consequences,
Yes.
there's physical consequences,
Yes.
and they will never escape that.
No.
So I think what they're trying to do is deny the natural order, and part of that goes back to the humanism that came over in the turn of the century, where they were trying to be transhuman. Like, they don't like the limitations and the consequences of
Right.
natural order, so they're going to evolve past that. Therefore, abortion, birth control, that was all man's evolution into being transhuman.
Yeah.
But where it leads, and this is the scary thing, I just saw a documentary called Dysphoric. And
Called the what?
It's called Dysphoric, and
Okay.
it's excellent, by Mark and Amber Archer.
Movie night.
And it talks about, it shows this clip of a TV show from Britain where this young girl, I think she's probably 16 or something, and she tells her parents that she's trans. And they're like, okay, we love you. We're going to be with you on this journey. And the girl says, no, you don't understand. Because the father says something like, it's okay if you're going to be a boy. She goes, no, I'm going to be transhuman. I'm going to give my body to science and my brain to the internet, and I'm going to live forever that way. And the father says, are you talking about committing suicide? And she's like, no, I'm kind of, well, yes, but that's where, when I watched that, I told my husband, I was like, that's demonic.
That is demonic.
That is because Satan is trying to destroy every human he can, and that's another way he's doing it.
We're talking so far-fetched.
Yes.
Because I even saw something, and we had talked about it. A woman in Britain or somewhere else got married to a tree.
Yeah.
A tree?
A tree.
What kind? Like a willow?
It was a beautiful tree, and I am a tree lover,
right?
But I'm not a tree hugger. I mean, but she was hugging her tree, and she'd found her soulmate.
Wow.
So I mean,
Wow.
the deal is,
wow.
Why do you think
it's
women
not
crave
even
this?
sustainable.
But see, it's a rejection of God ultimately.
Yes,
right.
It's a rejection of God. So
Absolutely.
if you reject God, you reject the family structure, you reject marriage, you reject, all of the traditional things. And I think what we're starting to see is if you play that out in your life, it's going to be empty. You're not going to thrive. You're not going to blossom into what you could be. Yeah.
Well, I think so many women have this deep desire to be seen, to not have constraint on them, to not feel like a doormat, to not feel controlled. All things that I think are completely rational. But
Yeah.
then you have secular culture that takes these very deep, inward concepts that we wrestle with, I think, as women, and it's skewed.
Yes.
But how do we tell a secular world the fruition of actually boundaries and liberation coinciding? Kind of like how I see God's law as God's love. I don't see it as always these dogmatic rules. I'm like, that is
Exactly.
his love. It's protection. It leads to freedom.
Right. I think we live it.
Yeah.
I think we live
Right.
it. I see so many women who are starting to embrace not just, I have a friend who has 8 children, and she is, on Fox News Weekend, and her husband has another. I mean, she's juggling a lot, but she's living out what she believes, and she's being strong in everything.
And people
she's
are
raising her
watching.
kids right. She's
Yeah.
speaking out politically. She's being involved in her community. I mean, that type of thing, you can't argue with it. When you see someone who is a leader in their community, who has raised a great family, who's contributing to society, who's caring about others, people will be drawn to that. They will want to know, what's your secret? How are you doing this? And then you can share with them, well, I'm just following what God laid out. And man, I mean, his way is best, and I love it. And I can be strong and I can be bold and know that he's got my back and that he's going to bless me as I go. And it's not going to be easy. There's going to be persecution. People aren't going to like it. But at the end of the day, your life says it all. How you live says it all. And I think people will be drawn to that, especially when they're seeking other means of joy, of fulfillment, and it's just not working. They're going to want to look around and go, well, man, they seem to have something, So I think it's living it. Yeah.
What is the spiritual price?
Well, I think the spiritual price we're paying right now, like in our current events right now, I see it most in the hearts of our children. I see it in children college age and younger who are so confused right now by what they're being fed. Social media, school, the whole culture is permeated by lies. And I think this generation is hungry for truth, but I think we're starting to pay a price spiritually.
I do.
With our children, first of all. Second of all, around the world. When you think about America and what we have done around the world, the light we have been in our short existence of 200 and some years, we have changed, the world in the aspect of spreading freedom, fighting for other people's freedom, charity work, education, healthcare. I mean, disaster relief. I mean, we've done so many good things around the world, and I think it really hit home to me our responsibility and this little window of opportunity that we have in the history of mankind to actually be salt and light on the earth. And that was, I was in Israel And we were standing on the Mount of Beatitudes with our guide. And at the time, my husband was in Congress. And so we were several members of Congress. And our guide said, who would like to read Matthew 5? And so my husband volunteered, and we read Matthew 5. And of course, it was surreal, just standing there where it happened. And the guide looked at us, and he said he wasn't religious at all. And he looked at us, he said, can you read verses 13 and 14 again? So we read, "Ye are the light of the world. A city that is set in a hill cannot be hid. Ye are the salt of the earth. But if the salt has lost its savor, wherewith shall it be salted?" We read those, and he stopped us, and he said, "I just want you to know that as a citizen of Israel, America has done this thing that Jesus said. You've done this thing. You've been a light to the world." He said, "I want to thank you for that. We see it." He said, "But I just want to ask you, please don't stop." He said, "Because if you stop, I don't know who's going to step forward and do what you're doing." And I realized, okay, so it's not just about my kids. It's not about the next generation. It's about our responsibility to God and to the world to be salt and light. That's the spiritual price we're paying. So if we lose it here, we won't be able to do the mission work that we've done around the world. We won't have that ability because we'll be so busy trying to survive that we can't give out to others. And I think that's the big spiritual price we're going to pay if we don't get involved.
Well, and that's beautiful. And we both had mutual chills here because it was amazing in its horrific nature. And we know the importance of the elections this year. We know the importance of the elections. We're not saying, we are encouraging people, but the vetting is so important. Your book covers that.
Yes.
What if we fall? What if this falls?
What if we fall? I think we stay faithful. Yeah. I think we don't give up. I think we speak out boldly and expect persecution. Yeah. We can expect it. It's probably going to come. It's already happening, actually, from our own government. We see people being persecuted just because they're people of faith, because they speak out about pro-life issues or whatever. So we can expect that. Of course, that's nothing new. I mean, Jesus experienced that. His disciples experienced that. Christians throughout the ages, But I don't think as Americans we've ever actually experienced it on these shores in the way that other places have.
Right.
And so I think we can expect that. At the same time, I think we work until Jesus comes. I think we do everything we can right now. And right now, it's all hands on deck. We need to link arms and, bring people. And that's why this book is non-denominational. It's nonpartisan. So you can hand it to anybody, regardless of what their political leaning, and say, here, read this. It's not offensive. It doesn't say one party's better than the other, because believe me, there's problems in all the parties.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
All the parties.
Absolutely.
So, you got to kind of pick your battles there. But I present, in the end, excerpts from the Republican Party platform, the Democrat Party platform, links to the Libertarian, the Green Party, so everybody can look at it and see where they land.
That's good. So it's not just a book if you're a certain red, white, red or blue. It's
to people
for all
of faith.
Of us.
So it's not to, only Christians.
Right.
If you have a Jewish friend, hand it to them.
Right.
If you have someone who is, Protestant, Catholic, you name it, hand it to them.
Right.
It's people of faith, because really people of faith founded this country. And when the Pilgrims came here and the Puritans came here and the Quakers came here, they were running from persecution. Right. And one of the main things was, how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? Right. And so that was a big, big discussion, among the people. I'm not talking like the founders. I'm talking about people themselves. That was their concern. My grandparents, this would be people of the Revolutionary era. It would be their grandparents or their great-grandparents who came to these shores seeking asylum, right? Seeking some type of way where they could follow their conscience and not be persecuted by it. And so, I have relatives who came here who were Quakers, and their manor house that they had a title and everything, ransacked, they were taxed, they were stripped of everything they had, they were running from place to place, and they finally came here. And when they came here, they lived in a cave, and the native people helped them survive. It was just an amazing story. And I'm sitting there, why? Why did they do all this? They were desperate for freedom. They were desperate for it. And so they saw themselves as stepping stones. They knew it might not even happen in their lifetime. They could worship God, sure, right there. But as soon as the government took over or a tyrant came in, they knew it was, it was fleeting. And so when the whole, okay, here we have a chance to look back at history and go, what worked in governments and what didn't? Okay, how do we preserve freedom? How do we allow them to fix societal wrongs? And the slavery was discussed at that point. There were so many societal wrongs they were discussing. They knew they had to have some type of tool to be able to address it, but they also knew that people of faith had to be involved.
Right.
And so I think that's what we've got right now. We've got one last chance, as people of faith to be involved.
Well, I feel very led that if you don't mind, we're going to act like we're holding hands, and you close this out in prayer for our nation, because I think you would be the perfect person. Is
we
that
need that?
all right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I love
You
it.
want me to pray?
Yes, please.
Okay. All right. God in heaven, we thank you so much for this opportunity that you've given us in this little window of time in history to be your salt and light around the world. Thank you for the millions who have been involved in being your hands and your feet and your ministers to people around the world who have taken your gospel to the ends of the earth, who have been ministers of your grace and your love and your freedom and your truth. Thank you so much for that opportunity, and I pray that we might not let it end on our watch. Lord, help us to be faithful with what you've given us. Help us to be stewards of the truth. Help us to be valiant for truth, to not back down, to not be intimidated, to navigate this new world of just upside down, inside out culture that goes against everything that you teach us. And Lord, help us to stand up, to know what we believe, to be firmly grounded in your truth, and then to speak boldly, just like your disciples did, just like Christians have done throughout the ages. I pray that you might just bring people of faith together, especially in America, Lord. Help us to realize the responsibility you've given us that comes along with our birthright as Americans. And that birthright is, yes, freedom, but with that freedom comes responsibility. And I pray we might take that, run with it, and use it in new ways to accomplish great things for you. Help us to get rid of the corruption. Help us to stand up boldly and to call it out and to not be afraid of the consequences, Lord. Just lead us and guide us, and thank you so much for your love and for your gift of salvation. In your name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Christy.
That was fun.
Yeah, we are
I feel like you have
blessed.
so much power and like such a humble way.
Oh, thank you.
That was
Thank
good for
you
my
so
soul.
much.
Oh, it was fun.
And
Thanks for
great
having
book. Great book.